flying and the ones that were on the ground, the test.
That's how GPS works.
Yeah, they have to do an awful lot of calculations in order for you to get the right location on your car telling you, turn left at the next intersection. I said turn left. You know how to do it. So time. Everything we experience in time. But it's not the time out there for Kant. It's the time as we're experiencing it. That doesn't mean that there isn't time out there, but as far as we can know, all we can know is what time seems to be from our own experience. Space. Now, an abstract concept doesn't take up space, but your bottle of water apparently does take up space. You can't imagine something that has dimensions without it taking up space. So everything has to have time, and everything that has dimensions has to take up space. But again, space is not out there. Remember, Berkeley started with this, our eyes receive all these stimuli, but all we can know is the pixels and the colors, and they can't actually know that there's something 50 feet away. It appears to be 50 feet away because of my habits of expecting something that looks that way to be that far, right? So, we experience things in time and we experience things in space, but we're the orientation by which such space is essentially available to us. And we can't say that it's actually the way things are in reality. We can't prove it. We act that way, that's fine. Practically speaking, of course, this all has to be normal, or you're going to have trouble. Imagine trying to drive when you're thinking, it's totally up to me how far away something is. No, that doesn't work. But the thing is, we can't prove it, because of that accepted limitation, right? But then on the other hand, we also have to have, as you see, and what's fun is for some reason Kant comes up with 12 categories. And I'm thinking it's because he's German. There's 12 instead of, 12 instead of saying, right, categories. And you try to figure out, now wait a minute, which ones are which? Which are the new ones? Is it the way he organized them? That quantity now, instead of just being one category, has unity, plurality, totality. By the way, this solves a lot of the problems that Aristotelians had all since Aristotle, because you think, wait a minute, this is one thing. Remember Parmenides, the universe is one thing, and yet it looks like it has plenty of parts. How can it be both one and many? Says the ancients, right? Guess what? All those problems go away now, because what we answer is, it isn't that it's one thing and many, it's that it appears to us as if it's one thing, and it appears to us as if it's many. Notice, it's not a problem with our sense of contradiction now over the thing, because the way it appears to us actually has to appear to us as if everything is both one thing and many parts. That's one computer, but it has a lot of parts. And the parts have parts. And the parts have parts, et cetera, right? We can't stop, even with quarks. We've got to figure out, well, what makes a quark a quark? We can't stop there. Even if we want to say that's, when you get down to the Planck constant, which is supposedly the smallest space that we could even think about that could exist, I'm like, why? Why can't we have it? Half the space of a Planck constant. What would that be? Right? Etc. Right? Well, this solves that sense that this is a contradictory statement, that things could be only one or many. Which is it? It's both. In fact, everything has to be all of those things. It has to have a plurality. It has to be all of it, a totality. Same thing with quality. Even when I'm thinking of, say, something horrible, like what's going on in Israel and Palestine, Gaza right now, I could see both sides. I could see why the Israelis are so upset with what happened, and yet they're just bombing the heck out of people to get at Hamas and so on. But they're killing 7,000 people so far or more, right? That seems an awful lot like what they're complaining about. That in fact way worse, actually, right? You can see both sides, and yet at the same time, it's not like the one side is true and the other side is false, right? Even though there's a clear contradiction associated with the side. And by the way, that's part of what Steve Haycox asked about. Doesn't our campuses teach nuance to people, right? Do you have to be one side or the other? Is it that vicious? Same thing with Congress, by the way. Well, nuance and educated experience means that you should realize that, yes, there are people that feel this way, there are people that feel this way. I can understand both of them. I understand the dilemma. I feel bad for both, horrified even, right? But at the same time, what's my solution? I can't join this side at the expense of this side and this side at the expense of that side, right? How do you solve this dilemma? I had an idea of something interesting associated with that. But yeah, the nuance of that. We want people to understand the nuance. An education, a modern education, should teach us the complexity of this kind of dilemma and not feel like there's like a black and white way of understanding it, right? So if you think, why is this kind of thing happening in a university, you might think, well, don't they teach nuance there? Where the people, understand the complexity of this dilemma. And instead of students taking one side or the other, actually behaving more like our university, where everybody keeps going about their daily business and feeling like, yes, this is a complex issue, but how can we help, right? And by the way, Hegel is going to point out that in order to really understand all of the characteristics of something, you actually need to understand all the negative aspects of it. Otherwise, you're missing out on an awful lot of the nature of something. Not only what is it like to be a woman, or what is it like to be a non-woman, right? If you're trying to describe what it's like to be a woman, you have to think, well, that includes all the things that they're not. Because otherwise they don't understand it, right? Did I say that very well, or is that just confusing? Well, we'll work with that more when we get to Hegel and how this plays out. Remember, when we get to the postmodern point of view, it confuses the heck out of Americans, because Americans in general, common sense kind of Locke, right? Still thinking the way Locke explained things for us, right? When we're thinking that way, and the Europeans explain, oh yes, this is the case, and this is the case. Yeah, I completely accept both sides. And you're like, what? How can you do that? Which side do you take? One or the other? Oh, no, I'm European. I think both ways. And you're like, what? Europeans, they're crazy. That's not even thinking, because it's so confusticated, right? So this actually, and by the way, Kant himself called it a Copernican revolution in thought. Because he thought, Copernicus was significant, it completely changed our ideas over whether or not the Earth was centered, to the idea that the solar system was centered on the sun, right? Revolution in thinking, totally different model, right? And this is a new model in how we think. But it struck me as odd also because Copernicus said that this, the Earth is not the center. And what Kant is actually arguing is that your perception is the center. So it's not really Copernican. That's the same kind of radical revolution in thought, but it's just the opposite, really, in the way it works. And remember, too, when we look at, I love this one. This, right? And when you look at that diagram, you're the center. You're the perceiver. Makes you the center of your universe, right? And we might have like the one diagram that has a bunch of us all together, but you get the idea. The modern perception is that the perceiver is the universe. So what happens next? Kant argues that we actually can have a synthetic a priori, and it's these categories of the understanding. The way that we were just looking at these categories, those have to be there in order for phenomena to be there. You have to have a self that's experiencing this phenomena, and at the same time, the thing has to be there for you to be experiencing it. But no, we can't actually see the self. Remember the problem that Jung gives us? I can't actually see a self. I see the kinds of experiences I'm having, and I think of them as always my experiences. But when I try to zoom in and see what it is that is that persistent self, there's nothing there except the experience, the chain of experiences that I'm having. So I can't actually see myself. And yes, I know, you look at the mirror and you think, that's me. Wait a minute, I'm on the other side. I love how that plays out in lots of jokes and things. But at the same time, when you think about it, I'm not really seeing me, I'm seeing my reflection in the mirror, right? And so I can never actually see moi, per se, right? I'm not available to myself. So we in our contemporary sense, right, we've got Doug Hofstadter, I am a strange loop, kind of thing, and Thomas Metzinger. And by the way, those are just the two that I mentioned. There's plenty of folks out there that deal with that same dilemma associated with the self. So I can't actually see the ego or the id, right? I can't actually see the thing in itself, but they must be there, right? And at the same time, I can only have experience if I see this logical orientation that things have in the categories of the understanding. So, yes, there is a synthetic a priori. It's all of these characteristics that must be there in order for me to have experience. So for Kant, I've transcended this limit of knowledge that the British empiricists have shown us, and been able to go further beyond that. I've transcended that limitation and end up with these ideas, so it's transcendental idealism, right, that explain how we can have shared experiences. Because if we don't share these kinds of categories, we don't have a shared experience with one another, right? And by the way, for Kant, this doesn't just affect, say, our sharing of the understanding of triangles and rectangles and mathematics and things of that sort, and what colors we see things to be and so on, and how far away things are, what the speed limit is. The policeman pulls you over and says, "You're speeding," and I said, "Not in my world, I'm not."
How old is that book for you?
Never, because I'm not the kind of person that actually speeds. Although I have to admit, shortly after I bought the Audi, I got onto the Glen. As I was coming down, from the Eagle River entrance ramp, I stepped on it. And wham! I was going 80, and I went, oh! And I slowed down. I have an SQ5. Yes, très cool, right? Doesn't have piloted driving.
But it's less fun that way.
But it's okay because I can reach the steering wheel, unlike the T-Rex in the commercial, right? No, it was way too much car for me, for the way I drive. There's 2 engines in the thing, and the second engine doesn't kick in until it needs it, and it never needs it when I'm driving. So I drive so slow. If I were driving in the Le Mans, whatever that race is called, or the